live together in peace. If you could join me. What a goodly thing if the children of the world could live together in peace. In peace.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Chatham. My name is Dolly Howell, and I'm the service leader today. We are happy to see you here and on Zoom. Are there any newcomers that wish to introduce themselves? I don't see anybody here in the sanctuary, so is there anybody on Zoom? Okay. We are happy to have Reverend Paul Sprecher with us today, who has been with us many times in the past. He is a retired minister from Bridgewater and was a minister that filled in for 6 months while Edmund was away. The flowers that we see on the pulpit today, Reverend Tracy brought to us last week. And she hoped that they would last till today. So we are looking for somebody who would be interested in helping us make sure there's something on the pulpit every Sunday. And if you have any suggestions, please call me. Are there any joys and concerns today? And announcements. Are there any announcements, not joys and concerns? I missed cued. Yes, please. Oops, this isn't the one that got.
Okay. My announcement is from Social Justice. April, we are making our special collection go to 5 C's. And I always love trying to remember it all. Cape Cod, Climate Change, Collaborative. And they do a whole lot of different things, but this is, April always seems like the month of the Earth. We have Earth Day and all that stuff, so Easter. And that is where our special collection will go this month.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on here in the church or on Zoom that has their hands up? Okay, well, the joys and concerns will come later.
Good morning. I'm John Ray, for those who don't know me, but I don't see any that don't. I've been asked to give a little bit of a talk about why the meeting house is important to me and why I contribute. Just by way of background, I was raised as a Congregationalist back in preschool, intermediate schools, and went away to college and lost all sense of religion, as many do, and lived through the rest of my life until I moved here permanently to the Cape, and did not go to church. As many of you know, we had a farm and we were very busy 7 days a week, never really sat down. And then we moved here to the Cape, and at that time my son and his wife and their little infant at that time were members of this congregation, and we decided to try it. And we have been here ever since in various roles. I'm supposed to tell you why it's important to me. Jay, if I could have that slide. The answer is all of you. That's why it's important to me. I mean, I got shivers when I saw Liz Sjogren come in today, because I haven't seen her for a while, and she was one of my favorite people. So it is the people, and you all know that. I mean, we're open, we're, mostly intelligent. We have very many talented people here in music and in art, in all sorts of areas of interest. And so that's really been our home. We've become home. And to be honest with you, when we moved to town permanently, we knew the bartenders and the plumbers. And we decided that maybe we needed to branch out, and we made so many good friends here, really good friends. And in fact, our social life for the last 20 years has revolved around this institution. And when you feel that way about a place, you feel you have to contribute and you have to enjoy what you're doing with the people you're doing it with. And we certainly have done that. I think the sad part is so many of our very best friends are no longer with us. We're at that age when you lose friends, and it's very, very sad, and I could list you probably 10 or 12 people who we were very close with that are no longer here, including Gene Pickett, obviously. So that's the problem. And in me, it gives me a sense of obligation of, I love you all, I love the feeling of being here, and therefore I have to contribute. I feel I really have to contribute. Whether you do that financially, spiritually, working in the thrift shop, or one of the many, many committees, those are you bought onto yourself those obligations. So just think about the obligations you have and how much you enjoy being here with us all and contribute. And again, one of the things, and I look around this room, except for Joe and me, we need more men contributing. I actually have gotten on the worship committee and unable to get off because I thought there ought to be some deeper voice, whether it's a good voice or not a good voice. Joe does everything, so I'm not talking to Joe. We are only alive because of Joe. And I do worry about staying alive. As you know, we are having attrition by death. We're having attrition by moving to other places because of health needs and other reasons. And we really need to sustain, that's one of our things, is sustain this place that we all love. So just think about that when you're signing up and when you're giving and when you're turning your back on us. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, John. But this season, think about the money. That's why it's stewardship season. It's great to be back with you all. I forgot to ask one question. You know, I've been in Attleboro for 3 months doing sabbatical service, and I got used to our rules and regulations. Do we stand when we sing in this place?
We're invited to.
We're invited to stand. Well, excellent. Now I know that rule.
And actually, the reason why people stand in a congregation is so that they're not sleepy during the sermon.
Reminds me of a story one time from Second Parish. There was a balcony, and some minister in the mid-1800s looks up at the balcony where all the kids were, and they were kind of making noise, and he says, "Quiet down, boys, you'll wake up your parents." Our call to worship is by Reverend Victoria Stafford. Forget about enlightenment. Sit down wherever you are and listen to the wind that is singing in your veins. Feel the longing, the fear, the love in your bones. Open your heart to who you are right now, not who you'd like to be, not the saint you're striving to become, but the being right here before you, inside you. All of you is holy. You're already more or less than whatever you can know. Breathe out, look in, let go. Dolly, would you come light our chalice for us? We light this chalice in honor of those who have come before us, kindling flames of wisdom in dark times, willing to challenge orthodoxy even at great personal risk, giving us a legacy of freedom and a love of truth, a legacy that warms our hearts and lights our paths. Our opening hymn is going to appear on the overhead for you, but of course, I have to use the hymnal. It's actually 114 if you want to look at the music. Forward through the ages, please rise as you're willing and able.
Everyone, forward through the ages, in unbroken line, move the faithful Spirit at the call divine. Gifts in different measure, hearts of one accord. Manifold the Spirit, one the sure reward.
Forward through the ages, in unbroken line, move the faithful spirits
Wider grows the vision, realm of love and light. In each loss or triumph, lose or triumph sight. Prophets have proclaimed it, martyrs testified, poets
Let's join together on the affirmation of the covenant. You'll find the words on the overhead. Spirit of His truth and service its gift. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love,
and to help one another.
Rejoice in love we know and share, in love and beauty everywhere. Rejoice in truth that makes us free, and in the good that yet shall be.
You can be seated, and it's time for joys and concerns. Valerie?
So we now come to joys and concerns. Is there anybody here in the church that has a joy they'd like to share? Oh, John.
Okay, we had a wonderful worship service committee on April Fool's Day, and we attacked the idea that people have brought up multiple times about passing the bags. And we decided that for each of us to touch a bag and pass it on at this point was probably not still a good idea. So we have ordered baskets on poles
Oh my.
that we could stand at the end of the aisle and pass in, and you can drop in your money, your hairpins, your purses, whatever. So that's my joy.
Thank you, John. Anybody else in the sanctuary? Anybody on Zoom? Lori?
I have joy that the anti-lynching bill, which was first introduced in 1918 and reintroduced repeatedly, has finally passed, and now Joseph Biden has signed it, and it is law at last. Praises be.
Thank you, Lori. Anybody else? Okay, so on we go.
Is this Spirit of Life? Excuse me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Let's join together in a time of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life and love, which speaks to what is deepest in each of us, we gather again to remind ourselves here of our highest aspirations. There lives within each of us an intimation of better ways for each of us to live and to take our part in the great work of healing the world. We sense that we ourselves each have a part to play. We sense that our hearts can tell us how best to find wholeness in our own spirits and how to extend it to others. We sense that there are new horizons of love to explore and to offer, and we know that we fall short. We disappoint ourselves and each other. Sometimes we despair and feel that we are somehow damaged, defective in some fundamental way. So we gather here to remind ourselves and one another that there is more love somewhere, more hope, more joy. We gather to revive that love, that hope, that joy in our midst. May we be reminded here of the richness of the future we can build together, a future where all persons are honored for who they are, where everyone's soul can breathe free, where each person is able to grow into wholeness. To this high purpose, we rededicate ourselves and open our hearts to welcome the ways that we can be part of this sacred work. We enter now into a time of silence.
Our anthem this morning is Once to Every Soul and Nation. And the words are by James Lowell, it's a 19th century. So some of the language is very difficult, but it's basically when you are called to action, what do you do? Do you stand for, and what do you stand for? And then in the middle, we're going to have a reading from Dorothy Day called Commitment, and that will be by Mary. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. In the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. Though the cause of evil prosper, though its portion be the the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong.
People say, "What is the sense of our small effort?" They cannot see why we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds are like that. No one has the right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do.
We must lay one brick at a time.
The reading this morning is by the Reverend David Pyle. It was delivered on the 198th anniversary of Reverend William Ellery Channing's Unitarian Christianity sermon, which we'll talk more about. As a minister serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation, you can't just buy a car. A few years ago, I was serving as a minister for a medium-sized congregation on the coast of Southern California when the old minivan I'd been driving met its end. I'd never bought a car while serving as a congregational minister, and I faced a dilemma I had not expected. Because as a minister serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation, you can't just buy a car. Why? Because several hundred people were waiting to make a value judgment about the character of their minister based on the choice that I would make about what car to buy. My choice in vehicle would be seen as an expression of how much I was willing to live each person's impression of what a Unitarian Universalist of good character should drive. I was heavily lobbied by the Prius faction of the congregation. Others suggested that biking the 15 miles to and from church every day would be appropriate, or maybe investing the time to take public transit. And I should make a public agreement with the congregation that at the minimum, I would forswear all thoughts of an SUV from ever entering my mind. And when the moment of truth came and I pulled into the church parking lot in my new smart car that Sunday morning, my moral character as a Unitarian Universalist was affirmed. There's a theological tension that rests at the heart of our UU religious movement, and that unacknowledged can create hurt and harm in our own lives, in our religious communities, in our families, and in our culture. I can best name this tension by telling an old Universalist joke. Universalists believe that God is too good to damn anyone to hell. Unitarians believe that they are too good to be damned. In assessing our own worthiness and that of others, we Unitarian Universalists have two theological frameworks that are in tension and that address this question of worthiness differently. They've come to be known to us by the names Doctrine of Salvation by Character and the Doctrine of Salvation by Universal Grace. And rather than speak of doctrines, we could call them instead patterns of thought based around how we assess our own worthiness and that of others. In some ways, if we still treated them as doctrines, we could acknowledge them more, and maybe they would have a healthier effect on us. The doctrine of salvation by character, which was expressed by Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing in his sermon, Likeness to God, held that it was in a person's character that they were best able to express their worthiness in this life. That a person's ethics, morality, judgment, honesty, commitment to their value, and lack of hypocrisy was not only the indication of their worth, but also a way to become closer to the divine themselves. That your actions matter, and that it is by living your values that you are judged worthy before God and in the community of fellow human beings. However, there is not one clear set of values that living a good Unitarian Universalist life should mean, and each of us are drawn to different priorities among those values. For some, it could be a commitment to the environment, like the members of the Prius faction of our former congregation. For others, it could be an expression of economic modesty or of dietary intentionality, as in being vegetarian or vegan, or to racial or gender justice, or to peace, or to economic equality. That my commitments and the expression of my ethical character is different from other people's can mean that we are in some ways speaking different languages in our expressions of our character. It takes intentional work to acknowledge how others are expressing their worthiness and goodness by character, especially when it's expressed in ways different from our own. And this is where the second theological framework becomes important in our religious faith movement, and that's the doctrine of salvation by universal grace, which we inherit from our Universalist forebears. The important manifestation of this theological framework for us is that our worthiness, our value as human beings is assured no matter what expression of our character might be at any given moment. That even when we fail, even when we're less than we might be, we're still loved and worthy of being loved. That even if I had shown up at church that Sunday morning in the 24-foot flaming red pickup truck with a gun rack in the back window that I once test drove to my wife's horror, my worth as a human being would still be assured. That I would still be worthy of love. Now, you can see how these two theological frameworks, one that calls us to express our worthiness in the world through acts of character, and one that guarantees our worthiness through divine and universal love, might be seen as being in conflict. And indeed, this tension, this perceived disconnect, is often at the root of congregational conflicts. And yet I have come to believe, he says, that the tension between these two theological frameworks of salvation and worth are together a vital part of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. For it's only by beginning from a place of seeing the inherent worth and dignity of every person, of acknowledging the divine love and light that is at the heart of each and every one of us, that we can acknowledge such variation in the expression of our values through our character in ways that are healthy. It's only through the assumption of universal love that the Prius people could accept that even though my smart car was not a hybrid, I still had inherent worth and dignity. For it is only from a place of universal love that we can see the value of our character. We're going to sing Filled with Loving Kindness. You'll see it on the overhead. It's actually in our teal hymnal. I know it's a little unfamiliar, but it's really simple. It's a zipper song. At every verse, we simply add a different word. So may I be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May we be filled with loving kindness. And then I added one more, which is not on your overhead. May they be filled with loving kindness. So we're going to do this 4 times. Frank's going to lead. The choir knows it. I know it. You're in safe hands. Please rise if you're willing and able.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be peaceful and at ease.
You,
May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May I be peaceful and at ease.
may we,
May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be peaceful and at ease.
may they,
May they be filled with loving kindness. May they be filled with loving kindness. May they be peaceful and at ease.
please be seated. When I was serving my ministerial internship at Arlington Street Church in Boston some 16 years ago, I was very aware of the statue of William Ellery Channing directly opposite the doors of the church, right on the edge of the public gardens. Channing had been the most significant minister in the history of that congregation, although the church itself was born some 2 decades after his death. And his spirit pervades the place, even though the church is not quite as old as the year of his death. And on several occasions, when I had the opportunity to preach from that great high pulpit, it's, I think, 20, maybe 25 feet above the floor of the congregation, I would walk to the back at the end of the service through the center aisle as the great doors were open and imagine myself watching the face of St. Channing as I said, "By the way, how did I do, Bill?" This year is the 242nd year since Channing's birth in 1780. Unitarian Christianity, the sermon for which he's best known, could properly be referred to as the Unitarian Declaration of Independence. The New England churches of the day were embroiled in one of those seemingly unending controversies between liberals and conservatives that continue to roil congregations to this day. At that time, what you would call the Congregationalists were the conservatives and the Unitarians were the liberals, but even now we see the Methodist Church being riven between liberals and conservatives over issues of gender and sexuality. Heaven knows if they'll split or stay together. Those on the liberal side of this particular controversy referred to themselves as liberal Christians. Their opponents tried to slander them by pinning the label Unitarian on them, thus identifying them with the still more liberal English Unitarians, whom the conservatives regarded as little better than atheists. Among those Unitarians was Joseph Priestley, the chemist and also Unitarian minister, who was driven from England during the French Revolution and welcomed in this country to found one of the very first Unitarian churches outside of Philadelphia in about 1810, even before the split of the New England congregations. And Channing was the unquestioned leader of the liberal side of the argument, and he finally decided to accept the name Unitarian, but to define it as a term of honor rather than opprobrium. He chose the occasion of the ordination of Jared Sparks, the first minister of the Baltimore congregation, on May 5th, 1819, to claim the name and define it on behalf of its adherents rather than its enemies. So he declared, first of all, that the Bible is a human document written by human hands that has to be interpreted by the tools available to the human mind. If it were otherwise, he said, human beings would not be able to comprehend it, however lofty its teachings might be. Reason, in short, must be the ground from which we interpret religion. And from this there follows several distinctive Unitarian doctrines. First, of course, God is one, not several, hence Unitarian rather than Trinitarian. Jesus was fully human, though in many ways exalted as humanity perfected. God is morally perfect and would not create humans with original sin, nor would God condemn any of God's creatures to everlasting torture in hellfire, especially not Unitarians. Jesus' purpose on earth was not to die to appease God's wrath, but rather to serve as an example of moral perfection. And virtue can be discovered in our own moral nature, using our conscience and the spark of divinity within each of us. Now, some of this language derives from particular theological controversies that have ancient histories and continue down to this day, but they represent at heart ideas about human nature, patterns of thought that help us to understand who we are and what we're here for. Channing believed that human beings are not fundamentally flawed, original sin, but fundamentally good. And this is echoed in our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. He said, for example, that God is another name for human intelligence raised above all error and imperfection and extended to all possible truth. And in the words of the first chapter of Genesis, we learn that we humans were made in the image of God. This is not confined to the Hebrew Bible. In the words of other traditions, in the Hindu traditions, the word namaste means roughly, I bow to the sacred in you. So Channing says that the germs of sublime virtue are scattered liberally on our earth. I cannot but pity the man, he says, who recognizes nothing godlike in his own nature. So this is the foundation of Channing's doctrine of salvation by character, that we all have within us the means to be virtuous and to know and do what is right, that we're not condemned to suffering and misery because we're fundamentally broken, evil, sinful beings. Like many of you, I suspect, I have sometimes struggled with this theological language, especially the term salvation, which is so pervasive in the Bible and in most religious traditions, including the Pentecostal tradition that I grew up in. I was so troubled by the meaning of that term that I ended up writing my senior thesis in college on the topic. And I was able to make sense of it by comparing it to the concept of the less theologically freighted C.G. Jung's term individuation. So Jung suggests that we humans become divided within ourselves as we forge our own personal identities. Now, it's vital for us to differentiate ourselves from other people, from our parents, from our mothers, fathers, the world around us, other people, and so on. But in the process, we also end up rejecting parts of ourselves that don't fit quite easily within the rigid separations we have to impose on ourselves in order to create the public role, the persona that we choose to inhabit. One of the most obvious examples of these is the gender identity that we put on. In a traditional patriarchal system, children are raised into strict roles as either male or female. Males are criticized for crying, for example, behavior that's not appropriate to real men, and girls are expected to play with dolls, boys with trucks, girls with dolls. And sometimes even the color of your clothes can seem to be gendered, so that when our son David started donning pink in honor of Miss Piggy when he was 3 years old, it seemed like a bit of a dicey choice for going to preschool in New York City. And Jung's insight was that these suppressed aspects of our whole selves, he refers to the male and female components in each of us as animus and anima, are still within us and need to be reintegrated for us to become whole. Salvation for Jung, then, was the reintegration of those parts of ourselves that had been rejected in the course of creating an identity, itself a necessary process, but not sufficient to create a truly satisfying life. And I think that our growing awareness of the need to break down the rigidity of our binary gender constructs points toward the possibility of more fulfilling and less fractured lives for all of us. Although I will admit that I sometimes get a little caught in the new terminology. One must write they for some people in writing a recommendation. And I just learned this week that a niece or nephew who is non-binary is now known as a nibbling. I don't know. I just learned it. I think it's kind of cute, actually. I don't know what uncle or aunt will become, but it might take a generation before we have to solve that particular issue. So the means to be saved, the means to become whole and be virtuous and live a fulfilling life are in our hands. We have the means within ourselves, because we're made in the image of God, in Channing's terminology, to develop our own character toward the perfection that we imagine when we speak of the ultimate, the divine, of God. But what about when we mess up? What about when we get into fights about whose virtuousness is greater than somebody else's? Prius owners, take heed. What about when we get tired and just don't want to be virtuous? That's when the other side of our tradition comes and reassures us that we are saved by grace, that regardless of what we do, we are still, each of us, worthy human beings who are loved and capable of love. Of course, we can also mess up in the opposite direction. The risk of the character side of our historic doctrines is that it tends toward a kind of self-righteousness, a little bit of smugness that separates us from those less enlightened souls who buy the wrong kind of car, vote for the wrong kinds of people, or believe things that are just crazy. We have a slight tendency to raise very high the value of education, as in we say, if only those people were better educated. There is a tendency within our Unitarian tradition to give great honor to education, hence these robes that we wear, which are a sign of our having been academically trained. I will note, by the way, that on our Universalist side, they did not trust theological education. People went, as they say, from the plow to the pulpit. It was only in 1850 that the Universalists first created a college, a university, Tufts University, and a theological seminary. That kind of arrogation, of smugness, is a kind of imperfection too, because it separates us from others who are equally endowed with inherent worth and dignity. I just learned to my surprise that this is actually an ancient heresy called Pelagianism, and I found this out because Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley of all people, gave an address denouncing Pelagianism in our contemporary context on the grounds that the elites believe themselves to be better than everyone else, thus leaving behind people who are not college educated. It's a real risk, and it causes some of the separation that we're experiencing today. And the thing is, other people mess up a lot. It's tempting to call others out when they mess up, but it's much more useful to call them in, to remind them of their own highest aspirations rather than just reproaching them for falling short. And being completely honest with ourselves about it, we, each of us, mess up and fall short a lot too. So there'll always be a struggle between our striving to do what's right and to persuade others to work with us to do what is right, as in your offering this morning for 5 C's, and the complete acceptance, the love and grace we can offer to everyone no matter what. That's the tension in which we must live our whole lives. And here's the good news. Channing tells us that, quote, difficulties are meant to rouse, not discourage. The human spirit is to grow strong by conflict. Of course, from that point of view, these are very good times for growing strong. In politics, of course, but maybe even within this congregation. Wholeness, salvation, to use the theological term, is about aligning ourselves as clearly and consistently as we can within this tension between right purpose and love, between justice and mercy, between striving and accepting. Or maybe it's about aligning ourselves with the whole reality of life pulsing, all around us, of life that shoots to life, in particular in the spring, of life that dances within our blood, within our bones, of life that is sometimes wonderful and sometimes terrible, but always life, a dance in which we can participate. So may we join ourselves in such a dance with one another. May we be willing to accept flaws in character and to love each person for being the divine spark that they are. Amen. And blessed be. Let's join together in our closing hymn. Oh, the offering. You know, different congregations have different traditions. Some take the offering before the sermon, just in case. Others take it after, in optimism.
We're optimistic.
We take it after.
Thank you, Paul. We all have a lot to think about today, who we are and what we do. This is a time when we ask for your contribution to help sustain and grow our meeting house. Whether you are now in our beautiful building or with us online with Zoom, our ongoing fellowship and organization continues, and we appreciate your support. If you are in the sanctuary, there is a collection basket for your contribution on the table in the back of the room. And there is also another basket there where you can contribute to our monthly community outreach, and I won't try to remember it, but it's 5 C's. And we also have a donate button on our website, and of course, you can also mail your offering to the meeting house here in Chatham. Whichever you choose and however it arrives, we are grateful for your generosity. And now let there be an offering to strengthen and sustain the space that is community of memory and of hope for all the keepers of the dream.
Our closing hymn is 131 in our hymnal, Love Will Guide Us. You'll find the words on the overhead. Please rise as you're willing and able.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed
join together in the words for extinguishing the chalice. You'll find them on the overhead. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please be seated. The benediction is by Andy Pecula. There are miles behind us as a people of faith and many more ahead. As we journey toward wholeness, may all that is good and true guide our way. May the joy of love lighten every step, and the miracle that is life be ever in our sight. Amen.
Thank you all for coming, and there will be breakout rooms for you on Zoom, and it's been a lovely day. Thank you.